two parts of the event today. The first part starts off with Commissioner Cecilia Malmström, who I would very much like to welcome here and thank her for being here. And U.S. Ambassador Anthony Gardner, who will speak after the Commissioner. And following the two interventions, we will have a short discussion time, Q&A time with the audience for roughly, I think, 1 hour until 4 o'clock. Following that, there's a panel debate that André Sapir will chair. So let me again thank you both, Cecilia and Anthony, for coming. Very much welcome you for being here with us today. And let me give the floor to André for a couple of introductory remarks and then to the Commissioner. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Guntram, and thank you again to the Commissioner and the Ambassador for being here, and for the panelists and for everyone. Just 2 or 3 words of introduction, and you know, why are there so many people and why is there so much interest for this issue? After all, both the EU and the US have already for many years trade agreements, preferential trade agreements with many countries. Now, certainly this is special. This is different from many of the other trade agreements that the EU and the US have with their partners. And I would say it's different in 2 manners. The first way it's different is by the nature itself of the discussion. This is not sort of a traditional discussion about border matters. There are some border issues and some nagging border issues that have been there for many, many years, but this is sort of second order or even third order. The real issue and the real difference between this discussion and all the previous ones is really the regulatory element. We are not talking anymore about border measures. We are talking about behind-the-border measures, some of which are not actually trade measures. They are regulatory matters that do have implications for trade. And this is sort of also intellectually a new element. It's also different in a sense because then it involves many other parties. That's why we have seen so many reactions from so many quarters. It's not just about trade negotiators. This is a negotiation with many other parties, regulators, and also in a sense the political dimension, because regulation in our countries, democracies, also involves parliaments, and therefore there's much more, in a sense, scrutiny from that side. It's also the case, obviously, that the EU and the US are the largest economies of the world, or were until recently the 2 largest economies of the world, the EU and the US, roughly the same GDP. But that's the third point. There is a third, second largest, equally large economy. It is China. And it's clear that also in this discussion, apart from simply China, there is Asia, which is in the background. The United States is very much involved in negotiations on the Trans-Pacific. The EU is also engaged in a number of negotiations with Asian partners. Japan, India, other parts of the world, Vietnam, and the Asian countries among themselves are doing all kinds of things. So there is this third dimension, in a sense, beside the EU and the US. There is the Asian dimension, and that leads me to the last point, and I will just stop with that. There is the multilateral system. European countries, the United States, we were the founders, the co-founders of the multilateral trading system during or immediately after World War II. First the GATT, then the WTO. We were clearly the champions. We are the ones who really built the rules, and I think rules that served us all well. And we know also that this round of negotiation under the WTO is one which has been very, very hard to conclude. And so there's a question mark, difficult to conclude, a new world, new issues. So where exactly are we going, and where is it that the EU and the US want to go on a bilateral basis, but where is it they want to lead us also for the multilateral agenda? So I think this is the issues, I suppose, that we are going to discuss in this panel and then in the next panel. So, Commissioner, I give you the floor immediately for your remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you to you. Thank you to Mr. Wolff, to Bruegel for organizing this. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador, good afternoon. It's really great to be here to talk again about TTIP, something that keeps me awake and busy during the days. And I've been thinking about the question you pose here, strategies for moving forward. And it reminds me of that old joke, you know, when a man is lost in the middle of nowhere and he asks for direction. And an old peasant comes to him and says, well, sir, I wouldn't start from here. And that's sometimes how we feel about TTIP. But then in the end, it's not strange that it is a bit difficult. I mean, André Sapir outlined some of the challenges that we are facing. And we know that there are similarities and differences. We know that, at least until very recently, we were the two largest economies of the world. We were not really used to make a compromise with others. And we know that there would be a great political support for this project, but also some concerns about TTIP. And we took on the challenge anyway, because we were convinced, and we still are, at least I am, I'm convinced the ambassador is too, that it is worth the effort, it's worth it economically, and it's worth it strategically. And we did so because for all our differences, we agree on most things. We have a lot of things in common, the EU and the United States, when it comes to values, everything from human rights to the importance of having high-quality regulation. And we engaged in this because we share those bed of principles combined with the size of the prize, which would help us to find a way forward when it counted. And we have decided on a fresh start that you are calling for. It's not only on its way, but it is also happening. A key element of what I wanted to achieve when I embarked on this now almost 4 months ago was a new beginning for the political debate within the European Union. There is no doubt that the debate continues, but we have, through engagement, dialogue and transparency, see that the dialogue has been taken forward, and they have been acknowledged. Even deepest critics admit that the transparency and the dialogue is something that is welcomed, and the fact that we now have a great deal of information on the public domain is, of course, a prerequisite to have a good debate with the European citizens. Do we need to do more? Yes, probably, and we will continue from the European side to publish text as we have agreed them. And then, of course, as we come a little bit more concrete into the negotiations, we should explore with our American friends what jointly we can do to communicate on the progress, because people are expecting, so what's happening? But as you know, there's a little progress here, a little progress there, and it's hard to see from outside how actually that is moving forward. And I will certainly continue to listen to discuss TTIP both here in Brussels with different stakeholders, but also on the different travels that I make in the member states, and urging national ministers, MEPs, members of national parliaments, but also business, think tanks and civil society to engage in this debate, especially those of you who think this is a good idea, to be out there and to be present in the debate to make the case. Because having information is important. Dialogue is very important. But some myths live on long after they have been disapproved. I got a letter the other day from a man living outside Dortmund, and he asked me whether night flights would be reintroduced in his local airport after TTIP. And of course, there has to be someone there to take that question seriously and to ask him that, no, sir, this will not be affected by TTIP. But this was very important for him, and there are lots of things living on there. A fresh start is also a reality when it comes to the pace of negotiations. When we first met with Mike Froman, we gave clear instructions to our negotiators to step up the work and to make as much possible progress this year. And this started with the 8th round of talk in Brussels last month, and it was the broadest set of discussions we have had so far since last summer. We have also agreed on two more rounds of this kind before the summer, and we plan a series of dedicated meetings on specific issues, for instance, on the regulatory issue. And with Mike Froman, We are keeping a close eye on the negotiations. We will meet next week in Brussels, and then I'm going to DC in May, and we keep on having close contacts. So we are moving ahead on the technical talks, but also on substance. Take the regulatory cooperation. That is, as André Sapir said, a very important part of the negotiation, and it's the novelty of these kind of negotiations as well. The last round, we reached a milestone in that both sides now have proposals on the table for what we call the horizontal part of those talks. The US are examining a proposal that we have put in from the EU side, a proposal that is, by the way, online for you to see. And it covers good regulatory practices, ways to make sure that both sides make high-quality regulation like impact assessment and consultations with the public. It covers ways of encouraging regulators to work together in the future, including through a new cooperative regulating body. And we want to do this in a way that doesn't, of course, compromise our freedom to make policy in the public interest, but to exchange experiences and knowledge, because, to be honest, the US and the European Union have the best regulators in the world, but technology moves so fast, so we need to be there and to take account of new research, new results, new technological innovation, and to share that experience to make sure we get the best standards for our consumers and citizens. And we will discuss this again in the next negotiation round in April in Washington. We're also moving ahead on the sectoral parts of the regulatory cooperation. We have much more detailed data now on the whole question of car safety, and that is enriching the discussions between the regulators and helping them to move forward. We're also moving on other sectors, medicines, medical devices, clothing, cosmetics, machinery, for instance. And these are core areas for TTIP, and we are moving forward, finding ways to make regulation more compatible, without lowering our standards for health, safety, environment, or consumer protection, but a way to avoid to duplicate and to recognize each other's standards on this. And the whole idea is to establish disciplines that would set gold standards globally as well, so that this could be brought on into the global multilateral agenda. And they cover also issues like trade facilitation, intellectual property, rules of origin, energy and raw materials. For instance, sustainable development. I hope that we will soon be ready to exchange proposals here. We are not quite there yet. We have had some initial talks, but both sides agree that we need to have strong languages on both labour rights and the environment as a matter of principle. And we have had detailed discussions on how to implement this. We're also making progress on a chapter on SMEs. We know that the smaller firms and the community they operate in stand to be the biggest winners in this, because they are the ones who suffer from tariffs, but also from cumbersome regulatory, because they don't have the same room of maneuver as a big company. And the costs for them are so big that it really puts trade barriers on them, because they can't spread the fixed costs. And that's why we need to think small, so to say, in these negotiations. And we have agreed that we need to help the SMEs to take the advantages of the deal as well. And that's why we have decided for a dedicated SME chapter. And that's the first time ever in a trade negotiations. We have set up a SME committee to make sure that we keep thinking small after TTIP is in place as well, and to deliver information to the SMEs about the rules and regulations to apply. And we are thinking from the EU side that we should set up a dedicated website, so one stop there, so they can see in an easy overview about the rules. The final area I want to mention is market access for goods, services, public procurement, more classical areas covered in a free trade agreement. And we have spoken about all these things during the last rounds and have a much clearer view of our sensitivities and priorities. We will continue to have discussions, and we know that both sides here want ambitious results. From the European Union side, we have delivered good, concrete results in the Canadian agreement that is now closed. So I am very confident that we will have a high-level outcome on all the pillars of market access. And this brings me to the question on how we deal with differences, because, of course, there are differences. That's why we negotiate. Otherwise, we would have done this long ago, and we need to recognize that there are sensitivities and difficulties. If there weren't, we wouldn't have those negotiations. And that means that we need to follow a traditional pattern of negotiations. We can't solve everything. We need to work through the technical issues, and then some things really need to be saved for the end game. And that's why you can't, when people ask, so where are you? You can't really say, because it will be in the very end game, but where, of course, as partners, we have to give and take. And that's the way things work. But we are moving on all these complex, time-consuming issues. There's plenty of them, and we will look for the political level for the compromises to be made in the short term. So we are preparing the ground for the final tough negotiations when that time comes. And, of course, we need to keep on talking to our stakeholders, to our ministers, to our parliaments, and to the different citizens about the progress we are making and about their concerns and wishes as well. We are aiming for a deal that is good for Europe and for the US, for the consumers, for the companies, for the citizens, and that deal is worthy of all the efforts that we are making. So patience is important, keeping our heads down and our spirits up, being cool like the penguin, sleeping in the fridge when needed. And I am convinced that in the end we will get very good results. And hopefully discussions today will help us to move forward, to get more clarity with your comments and insightful comments. And I think that, if you don't mind, Chairman, I'll stop here and I'll leave more time for question and discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ambassador?
Well, that was a terrific summary of where we are and where we what we hope to achieve. So thank you very much to Bruegel for organizing this session. We, at the mission to the EU, welcome our partnership with Bruegel for this session and for future programs. I think the right title for this should be a fresh start for TTIP, exclamation point, not question mark, exclamation point. That would be a better title. We continue to believe that TTIP is good for the United States, or would be good for the United States, and it would be good for Europe. It would be a debt-free stimulus for jobs and growth. I know that phrase is often repeated, but we believe it is true. We continue to believe that an ambitious and comprehensive 21st century model trade agreement is what we should aim for. Vice President of the United States Joe Biden likes to repeat the following phrase. He says, "There's no point being crucified on a small cross." Let's get a big deal done, because even for a small deal, we'll be criticized for it. Let's go big. And by the way, it's also politically makes a lot of sense, because I don't think a small deal would pass either of or all of our any of our legislatures, because we need to balance off many interests. And yes, we think we are close to getting trade promotion authority. Often I get this question. We think we are close. I speak to a lot of our congressmen. Perhaps the margin won't be big, but we think the votes are there. And we think we are close, yes, to a TPP agreement. And as Mike Froman has said, often, yes, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can negotiate TPP, finalize TPP, and continue to make progress on TTIP. So soon after the Commission came into office, we promised, the Commissioner and Mike Froman promised a fresh start. And let me say sincerely, I think that the Commissioner has delivered a lot to this fresh start, a new dynamism to the process. It seems that you're in a different country almost every day. I see you delivering speeches across Europe. And I think you can take a lot of credit for, among other things, improving the debate on ISDS, which was not an easy debate. It still isn't an easy debate. I know you're going to have an opportunity on March 18th to speak in front of the INTA committee, and I hope you will be able to persuade them, continue to persuade them to move in the right direction. Very importantly, because INTA's TTIP resolution will be voted on 2 months later by the full Parliament during its plenary. We also welcome the creation of the Commissioners Group on TTIP. We think that this perhaps will help, and we hope it will help in coordination amongst all the commissioners who have a stake in this negotiation. We welcome the focus of this commission, amongst other things, on better regulation. That is now the province of Vice President Timmermans, because it's a big part of what we're trying to do in TTIP. Not only regulatory cooperation, but what we call regulatory coherence, how each side actually makes regulations. And if we succeed in making our systems of regulation more closely aligned, then the output should be regulations that are in fact similar. We also welcome the support for TTIP now expressed by many heads of state in Europe, including recently by Chancellor Angela Merkel. In our view, we now want to see that top-level support manifest itself in greater willingness by member states to let the Commission negotiate a full and balanced deal. I saw this morning that President Juncker is quoted as saying, at the meetings of the European Council, European leaders have pledged their unfailing support for TTIP. And as soon as they go back home, I read their enthusiasm has waned. I want to get clarity on this matter. Now, we second that sentiment. Progress in negotiations continues. The Commissioner has mentioned those areas. We have advanced texts in quite a few areas, including the small and medium-sized enterprises, trade facilitation, rules of origin, competition, SPS, and perhaps sustainable development. So we are making progress. This narrative that we sometimes see in the press that, well, you're not making progress, I think, is wrong. Why do we think that TTIP is good for Europe as well as the United States? Well, I won't repeat what the Commissioner said, but essentially it's more choice for consumers, better products, lower costs, growth and jobs. Cheaper inputs for small and medium-sized enterprises, I think, is a critical point we need to underline. Europe is a place of high cost to do business because of labor, because of energy, and because of other reasons. If we succeed, it should reduce the input costs for not only large businesses but small and medium-sized businesses. The Commissioner mentioned cutting customs duties, reducing customs paperwork. A very important part is the SME chapter the Commissioner mentioned. How important it is to reduce the time and resources spent on meeting duplicative testing requirements. I keep on saying, I will continue saying, that much of what we're trying to achieve is actually a natural extension of what Europe did in creating a single market right here, without tariff walls in which goods and services can circulate freely. Now, there are many critics of TTIP, but I haven't found a single critic of the single market. And it's for good reason, because the single market was an enormous engine for growth and prosperity here. Now, at that time, I was here actually in Brussels. There were concerns voiced about what would happen from a single market. Oh my God, the quality of products would decline. Manufacturers would be swamped by inferior products. It didn't happen. There's no reason to think that TTIP would result in any of that either. Now, a lot of criticism has been made here about the Commission's projections about jobs and growth. And I find this puzzling. I find it puzzling as an American. Why? Because, first of all, we know from history, our own history in the United States, that free trade has stimulated exports. It has stimulated high-paying jobs and consumer benefits. Do we put a number on it? No, we haven't. But in my view, it doesn't actually matter to pinpoint the number of jobs and growth. The fact is, it will be a stimulus. Now, the United States economy, we're blessed, is doing well. We've seen 90 straight months of job creation, 12 million jobs created. Last year was the best for jobs growth since 1999. We halved unemployment to 5.5%. But we're not satisfied. We also want this deal because I think it has the potential to deliver even more benefits. But we're puzzled by arguments that the Commission's projections are too optimistic. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But why would you pass up the opportunity in Europe to have a debt-free lever, or debt-free stimulus for growth? It's not the only lever, of course. Completing on the single market, digital single market, of course, is important. But this is one of the ways that Europe can grow. Now, it's no secret we need to speed up progress. We both said it. Both sides have said it. We're not satisfied with where we are. We need to speed it up. And we've argued publicly as well that Europe should want to get this deal done during this administration. Now, if the next president is Republican, it will be harder, I think, for a Republican president to win Democratic votes. But even if the next president is Democratic, let's face it, it will take some time for that new administration to get its feet under the table. Perhaps a year, who knows? But at that point, how much time will be left in the Juncker administration? Not much. There is a joint interest here in getting this deal done under this president's watch. Now, some other challenges, because we need, I think, to be open about where we are. We have some mutual disappointments here. There was disappointment, there is disappointment with the tariff offer we made, even though we said it was the first step It was part of an iterative process. We always said our intention was to eliminate 100% of tariff lines. We came in at lower than the EU, but we said our ambition was to go much higher. There was disappointment in the United States. I think it's been also made public in terms of the services offer that was tabled. We think we have tabled a very good offer, which is in line with what we negotiated in our Korean agreement. We think that what the offer the EU has tabled falls short of what it has tabled in a number of other fora, whether it's CETA or whether it's Korean agreement. We're trying to sort out those two issues to break through the logjam on services and tariffs. I'm confident that we will get there. Another challenge is the need to, frankly, avoid some unhelpful talk in Europe about red lines. We'll be clear, I think we've already said it, that the S&D party in the European Parliament has frequently referred to red lines, and we think that that's not helpful at this stage of the negotiation. The climate on ISDS, let's face it, has improved, again, thanks in large part to the Commissioner, but we're not, we're still working through those issues. There are calls to reopen the Canadian agreement. It's clear that ISDS can't be included in either Singapore or Canada and not included in TTIP. That would be quite a remarkable result. We've seen some statements, including in Hungary and in France, calling for ISDS to be taken out of these negotiations. We saw the S&D paper on ISDS released on March 4th that indicated continued deep skepticism about ISDS. It's a significant step forward, but some of the views expressed are problematic. The paper says, for example, that it is not reconcilable with the rule of law that investors get a legal form outside well-functioning judicial systems of the parties through a trade agreement. Well, as you all know, I think, there are many intra-EU bilateral investment treaties containing ISDS. There are many bilateral investment treaties with OECD countries. Now, it simply cannot be true that suddenly Europe has discovered that ISDS is not reconcilable with the rule of law when all of those agreements have been in place with countries that have advanced legal systems. The paper also says there's no evidence that investment agreements with or without ISDS have any impact on investment flows. Well, actually, I have seen some evidence that points exactly in the opposite direction. It's produced by UNCTAD. Now, the paper suggests a number of areas for further improvement, and we are open to having the discussion. I know the Commission's looking at the response to its consultation paper. Some of them are actually already reflected in CETA. Some of them are already reflected in our model bilateral investment treaty. Some of them, frankly, we find are problematic and are not in line with European practice, U.S. practice, or global practice. We are concerned about the tone of the debate in Europe, to be frank. Some of this criticism has nothing to do with TTIP. It has everything to do with fears about globalization, free trade, fears of competing with the United States, perceived lack of trust in the United States, and myths, which the Commissioner has mentioned, that we have to combat. And it is a difficult job to combat these diffuse fears, many of which don't have to do with the agreement. Now, people mentioned, well, is the United States really interested in this agreement? The answer is yes, but it's early days for us. You have an advanced debate here on TTIP. We're starting. But I can tell you there will be no philosophical disagreement with the proposition that a free trade agreement is a good thing between the United States and the European Union because we share values, the same values. The risk for me is completely different. The risk is that some constituencies will say there isn't enough upside in this deal. U.S. merchandise exports to the EU were lower in 2013 than they were in 2008, despite a 21% increase in overall U.S. exports. Another interesting statistics on agricultural exports from the United States to Europe relative to the rest of the world. Between 1990 and 2013, so about 23 years, agricultural exports to Europe went up 60%, but exports to China quintupled. So you can imagine that from the perspective of an American farmer, when you look at the surplus that Europe has today and the growth markets of the future, they will want to know, is this deal also going to deliver for us? And finally, I think it's early days, but there may be concerns about a weakening euro. We're just talking about that. We don't know how far it will go. But even some economists this morning were saying, were putting forward the argument, is Europe exporting its economic weakness to the United States? I hope that's not going to be a problematic argument. I will just conclude. We believe in this deal. We think the strongest argument for this deal is not only economic, but is geostrategic. It would set the standard for future regional global deals. It will reflect the value we place on rules-based trade, high standards, regulatory transparency and accountability. Mike Froman has been very active on actively speaking out on this topic. It would help us make progress in the stalled WTO talks. We believe we have a window of opportunity, it will not last forever, for us together to set the rules for global trade before others do it for us, whether it's the re-emerging markets in Asia or elsewhere. We repeat, globalization is a fact of life. Either it shapes us or we try to shape it the best we can. If we fail, others will do it for us. President Obama said exactly that in his State of the Union address. He said, China wants to write the rules for the world's fastest growing region. That would put our workers and our businesses at a disadvantage. Why would we let that happen? We should write the rules. We should level the playing field. Finally, I'll say to this criticism about a race to the bottom, dilution of standards in Europe, I cannot understand this fear. It's exactly the opposite. We want a race to the top. And Mike Froman said so in a recent article. He says, we want to launch a race to the top rather than be subject to a race to the bottom that we cannot win and we should not run. Think of all of the trade agreements in the Asia-Pacific region. The vast majority of them make no commitment to protecting labor rights and the environment. What we're trying to do is exactly that. And finally, energy. Maybe, well, we don't know, but there may not be an energy chapter. But signing a free trade agreement with the United States would simplify the export of LNG gas to Europe and in part address the energy insecurity that Europe suffers from today.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you to you both. So we have now roughly 25-30 minutes for the Q&A. So I immediately open the floor for discussion. All I would like to ask you when you take the floor is to introduce yourself. Yes.
Hello. Hi. My name is Craig Woolley with the German press agency TTA. I had a quick question for Mr. Malmström and Mr. Gardner. So for Mr. Malmström, if we don't make more progress, because we've had lack of some progress on financial regulation, we don't know if there'll be an energy chapter, we're still not sure if we'll have ISDS, would you be up for a TTIP light? Do you think that would be an interesting concept to get a quick deal, maybe a bit less ambitious?
Shall we take 2-3 questions?
And for Mr. Gardner,
Thanks. So let's take 2-3 questions, please.
Well, my name is Javier Arias from BBVA, Spain. I have one question on the first for both Madam Malmström and Ambassador Gardner. It's on the well, I'm representing a bank, which is financial services, and as far as I had understood in your presentation, financial services still is not fully in the loop of the TTIP. I wonder whether that might be subject to be included. What is the scope? And I read recently that Commissioner Hill was in Washington and New York very recently, and he was really encouraging to engage further on financial services. So where we are and where we are heading to in this regard.
Thanks. One third question for this first round. Everybody's shy at the moment. Oh, please, yes. On this side.
Thank you very much. No, I'm not in favour of a TTIP light. Of course, we have tabled what we want to get out of it from the European Union side. The Americans have done the same. We will not, I can tell you that we will not get 100%, neither will the Americans. That's why we negotiate. But to have a TTIP light just to take the low-hanging fruits would not really be worth the efforts, because, of course, we trade every day. We could look at just eliminating a few tariffs and setting up some working groups, but that wouldn't really be worth the efforts. We have gone so far right now that things are linked. We have to give a little bit there because that's a priority for us and that's a priority for you, and then it's all linked. So to just say that we agree on a small little area of these issues, that train is gone. But we have possibility to really do something extraordinary here, covering both the classical trade obstacles, but also regulatory, and as both I mentioned, Mr. Sapir and the ambassador, the geostrategic importance of globally trying to set rules in a world where if we don't do it, someone else will. On financial services, it is true that we have not, we have started to discuss this. My colleague Jonathan Hill was in the US last week and discussed both with Ambassador Froman and with people from Treasury to try to get a clearer picture of what are the expectations on both sides on this. Of course, financial services is extremely important, so we need to discuss it. We also need to set up some sort of, not an institution in any way, but some sort of a more regular body where we can touch base, where we can discuss implementation of the different undertakings that we have taken. We have some that we have decided to do after the financial crisis in Europe. The US have others. Sometimes they coincide, sometimes they don't. That's not really the point. But to see that we implement it, that we follow up, that we keep each other informed about what's going on. Also, we have some joint commitment in the G20 when it comes to money laundering and tax evasion and so on. That could be a place to discuss these issues. So we are advancing on this issue, and it's very important to keep it on the agenda. When it comes to data flows, yes, well, data flows all the time between us, and it will certainly continue to do so. And that's a good thing, and we need to facilitate that. When you talk about personal data, that's when it becomes complicated, of course, because then you have laws and data protection laws, and we are right now in the process, as you know, in the European Union to decide on new data protection laws. So we have to be very careful. That process needs to go on as well. But data do flow between us, and it will continue, will grow with the e-industry. And that's a really good thing, and we need to facilitate that. But when it's personal, and when depending also what's the use of personal data, then of course data protection is very important. The member states and the European Parliament have made that very clear. So we need to make sure that we stick to the rules that we have on that. I think that covered it. Maybe the ambassador.
I agree with all of that. Let's reverse order data flows. We should separate two separate issues: data privacy and the data flows. Data privacy is an important issue. Concerns here have been expressed. We are addressing those concerns, and we are negotiating two agreements right now as part of our effort to address those concerns. It's the upgrade of the Safe Harbor Agreement, and it's the law enforcement so-called umbrella exchange of information. But let's not confuse that process, which is underway, and we hope to conclude, hopefully by this summer, with the principles that data flows are the lifeblood of transatlantic commerce and will continue to be. In fact, will grow. And we hope that there should be some general principles enshrined in an agreement saying that data flows should be protected, and that discriminatory measures should be avoided with regard to data. For financial services, well, they are in scope. Financial market access is in scope, as you know, Javier. But what's not in scope, despite requests from the EU to put it in scope, is financial regulatory cooperation. For all the reasons I think you've heard now, many times, that although it is important, we think, 2 points. First, there are very few areas of divergence between us that have emerged, and one of them happens to be on derivatives. But we have a process that's underway in the financial markets regulatory dialogue, which we think, in our opinion, has worked. I'm told it works pretty well. We meet, I think, twice a year, once every 6 months, to address issues as they arise. And we're talking as well in other fora, G20 included. So we continue to question whether there is a need to set up an institution, a body, an organ in the context of a free trade agreement to deal with financial market, financial services. But I know the EU continue to make its case. On regulatory cooperation, I think there we need to distinguish between regulatory coherence and regulatory cooperation. We think that regulatory coherence is just as important, perhaps more important than regulatory cooperation. Coherence meaning good regulatory practices, making our systems not equal, and sometimes it's been misunderstood that we're trying to force on Europe our system of making regulations based on the notice and comment period, whereby anybody, anywhere in the world, can make a comment about our draft regulations, and we will respond. There will be a response to those to those comments. The system is different here, but the EU is autonomously undergoing its own process of looking at how it makes its own regulations. But we're keen on making those systems more coherent. At the same time, there's discussion about cooperation in particular sectors, whether it's pharmaceuticals and cars and other areas, chemicals, where there is progress. It's not, frankly, very exciting progress right now, but I kind of get excited by it because it's very technical and kind of interesting. On auto safety, for example, we actually have made some progress. Now, it's still pending. There is a study that's been completed, not yet announced, about things about auto safety, including seat belts, about bumpers, and so on. And it's all about determining whether the data is there in Europe to enable our regulatory agency, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, to give a functional equivalence determination about EU standards in this area. So we have to wait to see what happens there. The FDA has been, in terms of, has been accompanying the European Medicines Agency, EMA, on its various audits of European facilities. The same will happen to EU in the United States, all of which is aiming to the nirvana that you test once and you accept everywhere for those products. So that sectoral cooperation is continuing and is making progress. Even more, frankly, even more promising is for us to sit down together and talk about emerging regulations that haven't yet been written. And there are a number of areas in auto safety. I got a 2-hour briefing on this stuff when I was back in Washington, fascinating, about interlocks between ignition and seat belts, variable lighting, automatic braking. I mean, stuff that really makes you, exciting. But these are areas where we haven't yet actually determined our own regulations, and why not sit together and decide, can we not draft regulations that are the same, consistent? That is a fertile field.
So let's take a second round. First have Jaroslav.
Thank you. Jaroslav Pietras from the General Secretariat of the Council of the European Union. I cover a few things, including energy, climate, but also culture. So I wanted to ask about things which normally, with the complexity and the completeness of the agreement, you might encounter a number of difficult areas. For energy, Ambassador has said that maybe there will be no chapter. However, with the discussion now on energy union, the issue of energy security, diversification, supply becomes very important. So I wanted to hear a bit about intentions in this area. On this sustainability issue, we will have a probably climate agreement in Paris. It will not be very ambitious or intrusive into in domestic markets. However, there is a question of carbon markets, cooperation between carbon markets or pricing, or maybe even a problem when measures counter carbon leakage can be taken. I mean, just to see whether there is a problem here as well. And finally, a small question about the cultural exception.
The next question is Rod.
Can I use this? To to put it in the form of a question, it would be to Ambassador Gardner to say, is he aware of a certain trend of thought in Brussels that the Fresh Start is a bit unbalanced? Now, I'll fill that out by saying that in Brussels we've had a tumultuous last 12 months, including new parliament with new powers after the Lisbon Treaty, the new commission, the new organisation of the commission, the ISDS consultation, which you both referred to. I would really go so far as to say that there's almost nothing else that's talked about in the trade world in Brussels other than TTIP. I mean, we pay a little homage to Doha here and there. But the imbalance arises because we're also being told, because we also have messages coming from DC, from Washington, that your major priority is TPP, and to get that you need TPA, and that TTIP is definitely at the back of the queue. So there's an imbalance in terms of the urgency of this for the United States.
Next question.
Yeah, Tim Adamson, AmCham EU. The geostrategic importance.
Yes.
Jörg Münchenberg, Deutschlandfunk. A question to the Commissioner on CETA, if you don't mind. There's a big discussion in Germany about ISDS in CETA. How much room do you see to change this chapter in CETA?
Bruegel from Clear Gottlieb. My question is to both to the Ambassador and the Commissioner. Both of the parties expressed their acknowledgement regarding the importance of competitive markets in their communications to the public. I was wondering if we should expect a special chapter devoted to competition law in the agreement. If that's the case, what's the status of the negotiations? Should we expect something similar to the chapter in the EU-Canada agreement, or will it be more limited or more detailed? Thank you.
Thanks. I suggest we stop here for the questions, unless there is something very, very burning. And I first give now the floor to the Ambassador, and that way the Commissioner will conclude.
All right, I'll try to be brief. So let me start with the unbalanced question. You know, Mike Froman has asked this question often, and he says, look, if you have two teenage children, but one of those children is 17 years old, is a year away from going to college. One is 14 years old. Who are you going to be focusing on first in terms of college admission? You'll be focused on the 17-year-old. I mean, it's just more advanced. We've been negotiating that deal for a much longer time. It's at a much more advanced stage. So naturally, there's more attention to the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. But it should not be somehow seen as less, sort of a lack of enthusiasm for the transatlantic agreement. We continue to be enthusiastic about it, but they're simply at different stages of negotiation. And I mentioned, I won't repeat, that we still think TPA is, we thought it was going to be done in the last few weeks, but we're still confident it will be done soon. Cultural exception has been mentioned briefly, but I think it's quite clear what the situation is there. It's not part of the mandate. Now, I think the Commission itself reserved the right to go back at some future stage to change the mandate, but currently it's not part of the mandate. It's not being negotiated. On energy, even though we are not convinced that there is a need for an energy chapter, we clearly understand the sensitivities in Europe about energy and why the request has been made to give greater assurance, comfort about greater energy exports given the geopolitical situation right now. And our answer is that right now we have a permitting process, as you know, under the Natural Gas Act, which you have to file a permit. 7, I believe, have been approved. The first one is going to come on stream at the end of 2015. I saw actually a few days ago, I believe, that a Lithuanian company will be buying LNG from Cheniere at Sabine Pass, Louisiana. An FTA would make that process for export quasi-automatic. Now, again, it's for export to the world market. It doesn't have a destination clause attached to the molecules. The exporters will decide where that gas goes. But indirectly, it will have an impact on Europe in terms of prices. The last point, before I turn it over, would be transatlantic unity. It's a crucial point. I like to point to a wonderful picture that was published in The Economist 2 weeks after I arrived. And the picture accompanied an article in The Economist. And the article was on the ties that bind. The picture was of Vladimir Putin dressed as Cupid in army fatigues, half naked, his torso naked. And he had just fired an arrow at a tree, and someone had carved a heart shape on the tree and carved the names US, EU. And in the distance, someone who looks like President Obama is walking off hand in hand with a woman dressed in the EU flag who looks somewhat rather similar to Angela Merkel. And the article was exactly about this, that the geostrategic context is focusing minds on the ties that bind and the importance of shared values. And when we are negotiating this agreement, I think it's forefront in our minds. It's not just about trade. It's about binding these two critical trading partners together.
Yes, thank you. Just to add to what the ambassador said, we would like to have a chapter on energy in the agreement, but we are now discussing it, and that's, I mean, first let's discuss the content, and then we'll see in what form it comes. Because, of course, the European Union, many countries are very dependent on one source of energy from one particular country. And in order to diversify this, of course, having access to gas and oil from the US would be one way of doing that. And that links to the transatlantic cooperation and the geostrategic as well. On climate, we are... I mean, the US and EU are certainly in some ways cooperating in the United Nations climate goals. We have some differences as well, but we are looking at having language referring to the goals there on energy efficiency and so on, and also see if we can set some standards on this that would also be global standards. This is ongoing discussions. As you know, the audiovisual exception is there. It's always in the EU agreements. Of course, we have a lot of cultural cooperation with the US. That is not excluded, but audiovisual services are excluded from the mandate. On the transatlantic cooperation, again, I mean, energy comes very much into that, and the picture you referred to, and Putin is, of course, not a fan of TTIP. That has to be mentioned. But I think the last year, we need to be open about that. The last years, the transatlantic cooperation has been damaged by the NSA and the Snowden affairs. And now we are doing our reforms on it. The US are doing reforms on this as well. There is a very intense debate in the US. And I think a successful TTIP that covers many areas and successfully explained, and where people feel engaged and included and informed about this. Of course, not everybody, but at least the majority could strengthen those ties, because yes, there are differences, and yes, we've had our discussions. But compared to all other parties in the world, there is nobody who has the same values and the same sort of set of cooperation and views as the EU and US. We are a natural partner. We have formed history for the last 60 years, and we can do it again in the future. And even if I don't know if I am the 14-year-old teenager, but we'll certainly try to do that in a good family relationship. And we are already cooperating in Ukraine and in other areas of the world, of course, Syria, other areas where we try to cooperate and find common grounds. But TTIP cannot solve all those problems. We have other forums where we discuss. We need to be realistic about that as well. When it comes to CETA and ISDS, we are working on reforms on this. As you know, we included quite a lot of reforms already in the Canadian agreement, we are looking at further reforms on transparency and clarity into making sure that we limit possible issues of abuse. I will discuss some of the proposals with the Committee of Inter next week, and then a few days later with all the ministers. We don't have a ready proposal yet, but we have some thoughts that I want to share with them. Now, our aim is to see if we can create a sort of ISDS mechanism, because I think it was you who mentioned we have already 1,400 the European Union. We have them. If we can create some sort of state-of-the-art version of doing that, and that would then, of course, be our proposal to include that in all our coming agreement with all countries. But can we retroactively take all those changes and that put them into CETA? Well, there are two partners here. It's also the Canadians, and we have said to the Canadians we have closed those negotiations. So we are not opening up the Canadian agreement. I want to be very, very clear on that. Can we make some changes in there, or maybe some joint political commitment to work in a direction if the Canadian agrees? Yes, maybe. But we cannot reopen that chapter and be under the illusion that if we agree on quite major reforms, that they would automatically move into CETA. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will stop the discussion here and first thank both the Commissioner and the Ambassador. If I may, I'll just say a few words in closing. Just to say what kind of things I heard. What are the messages that I personally keep from the discussion? One element is, I think, that both of you made on several occasions, is the political context. And I think the political context, there were references to, let's say, the European continent geopolitics, and there were also references to the more global geopolitics, emerging countries, China, and those issues. So I think one is certainly, you emphasize looking at this discussion in this geopolitical context. A second one is, I think that both of you also emphasized, is ambition. Because there is indeed, and I'm sure this will have the continuation of this debate in the more technical panel discussion that we will have now. What can be achieved in terms of, in particular, in the regulatory field. This is the novel but more difficult one, and about that, I mean, okay, one will have to see what is one really talking about in the regulatory area. I didn't hear much the word convergence. I heard more dialogue, cooperation. So there's a difference between the two, and I think that is worth discussing. I think also ambition. I think, as one will see, is in terms of the timing, and maybe there is a link between the two. Obviously, I heard the ambassador say, we want this to be concluded. Maybe not ratified, but conclude the negotiation during this administration, this U.S. administration. So that's pretty short time now. Whether this is feasible or not, and whether there will be a trade-off, in a sense, at some stage, between the ambition on the content and the ambition on the timing. I mean, that's something that obviously very, very much open. There are all kinds of other issues. I think it was also refreshing, in a sense, to hear that, I mean, and you were both very candid, I think, in hearing that, there are not only issues on the table that are still difficult to cross in the regulatory field, but there are also the more traditional issues, and whether it's on tariff and whether it's on services, they are lower on the radar, on the political radar, because indeed those are the traditional barriers, but doesn't mean that they are necessarily easy when it comes to conclude. So I think there's still a lot of work ahead, and in that sense, I think the seminar that we will have today will benefit a great deal from the impetus, the intellectual impetus that you gave both in your discussion, in answering the questions. So I'm very grateful. I think it's a very good start for a discussion. Thank Thank you very much. So.